Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Help Is Here podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about porn escalation. You know, when you end up looking at progressively novel sexual content, or you even go ahead and act out in sexual ways in person, in ways that to you feel very compulsive, in ways where you look back and you feel perhaps shame or regret, and you feel like, why did I do that? You know, like, what's wrong with me? How have I ended up doing that thing that really, like, when I'm thinking about it rationally, it repels me a little bit. So how do people end up there, and how can we change the thinking a little bit to at least overcome that problem one step of the way? Now, this video isn't going to explain to you how to solve your porn addiction for good. This channel isn't about providing quick gimmicks, quick hacks, you know, sort of appealing to people, shiny object syndrome. Instead, it's about helping people reframe their thinking to understand what's going on in their minds, in particular, understanding the addicted part of the mind and getting very rational and smart and proactive on dealing with that part of the mind in the correct way so that we can actually live free of porn addiction for good. So, porn escalation. Well, I want to talk about my personal experience with this, right? And one particular junky thought. So within the Beyond Compulsion method framework, what we have are junky thoughts and unanswerable questions. And these are basically the indicators of compulsive desire. This is when the addicted part of the mind, which is a part of your mind that's going to try and get you to engage in compulsive behaviour, it's when that part of the mind's doing a lot of the talking, right? And it's going to come up with junky thoughts and unanswerable questions, and it's all quite irrational, and it all is just focused on getting you to relapse. Now, one junky thought that I had recently, which I want to share, because I was on a call with a guy who had recently escalated to some quite extreme content, and then another guy a few days later had actually acted out in person in various ways that was kind of based on the porn fetish. And I'd spoke to like these two different guys who, if anything, they'd both gone to very, very extreme places with their porn. And their porn addiction. And it got me thinking about one thought pattern I had in particular in the past when I was in that same place. The thought I had was it would come after I'd relapsed, right? This thought would come after I'd already relapsed a little bit. Like, let's say I've just like watched a bit of porn and I'm there feeling a bit like, oh God, why have I ended up here again? You know, what's wrong with me? I've not got into the sort of stage of like having the motivation to really make the change at that point. It's more like still in that cycle. So maybe there's been some like edging going on, maybe there's been some binging, and then I actually have had this specific thought in the past of, well, if I look at more sexual content, if I look at the stuff that really is pretty crazy stuff, and nothing like illegal, but like if I try seek out some pretty like degenerate content, particularly degenerate stuff which is maybe a little bit more novel, that's going to be so disgusting when I think about things rationally that it's going to really motivate me to never go back to this place again. Which is such a crazy thought pattern to look back on, but I used to think that basically, well, this was the addicted part of the mind, you know, this was a junky thought, this was the way in which the addicted part of the mind convinced me to end up looking at progressively novel content. The thought was, if I can get so deep into it and like look at this really extreme stuff, then like tomorrow when I have this fresh start, I'm never gonna want to look at that stuff again. And the way in which this thought pattern is so like shrewd, it's such a smart ploy from the addicted part of the mind, because it's basically trying to convince you that you're doing this for positive reasons, when obviously rationally you look back on it and it's like, well, obviously that's just an excuse to engage in that behaviour, you know, it's just another strategy from the addicted part of the mind. But it kind of follows this path of self-sabotage for the benefit of you in the future. Like, that's the illusion anyway, that's the bullshit. And so it's so important to see that that isn't true, because motivation has no part in solving porn addiction. Like it's not going to help you unless that motivation encourages you to go and get some help and get the right rational support to solve this problem. Motivation is not going to help you in moments of compulsive desire. So the junky thinking I had was basically, this is like engaging in this behavior in this extreme way is going to motivate me to not want to look at the content again in the future. But the truth is, when your brain is wired in this way, you already have these neural pathways of compulsivity. Acting on the desire is what creates the desire to engage in the behavior again in the future. So the thought that by acting on this desire, it's going to lessen the desires in the future because I'm going to be so repelled by this horrible, disgusting content is so entirely flawed, because it's acting on the desire which is going to create the desire in the future, because it strengthens the addictive neural pathways for you to go and seek out that content again or act in that behavior again in the future. I hope that makes sense. There's a lot there to take in. But honestly, when you understand how like the neural pathways work and how acting on the desire is the thing that creates the desire, this makes so much more sense. And when you really understand the addictive part of the mind, and you've had all the training on it, and maybe you're in the Beyond Compulsion Academy learning alongside us, so you really get this stuff inside and out, you're going to see this whole self-sabotage idea completely differently. You're going to see that actually it is just another strategy from the addictive part of the mind. It isn't really self-sabotage as such. It's just the addictive part of the mind wanting more and more and more due to the tolerance cycle, and managing to convince you with all kinds of bullshit that it's a good idea to engage in this behavior. And of course, when you're in that headspace and you don't have a tool to deal with the addictive part of the mind in a proactive, direct, attacking way, it's almost inevitable that your content is going to somewhat spiral, and you're going to look at more and more novel stuff. And there can be all kinds of thoughts around that, but it's all part of the same package. It's all part of letting the addictive part of the mind take control due to the inability to deal with it, due to the lack of training of knowing how to deal with it. So hopefully this makes some sense, and hopefully it can offer a bit of a different perspective to people who are maybe engaging in those compulsive behaviors. I want you to know that this isn't really to do with sex. It's not to do with your innate sexual desires. You don't need to go down the rabbit hole of understanding all your trauma and things like that. Instead, what you need to do is get real smart and just strategic, and take more of a scientific lens on how do you actually proactively deal with this part of your mind that wants you to engage in the compulsive behavior, and understand at a very first sort of starting place that there's nothing wrong with you for wanting to engage in these behaviors. It comes from acting on the desire in the past, and simply how addiction works. Thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to understand how much porn is actually impacting your life, then feel free to take the compulsion test and get a score out of 100. I'll leave a link to that below. Cheers, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.